My name is Shoba, as you heard, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to invite my panelists up to the stage. Deepthi. And Ying Chung. And Kaddie. So we're going to have an interactive session. I'm just going to give a little bit of background. So I am a Malaysian-born entrepreneur of Sri Lankan descent, but I found my entrepreneurial bug only when I moved to America, the US, and now I've been in Berlin for the last 2 years, working on my third startup that's based out of Berlin, but our customers are in Asia and in India and Southeast Asia as the first markets. And I'm going to let the format is I'm going to let the three panelists give you a little bit of background about themselves, and then we're going to start a conversation and field some questions from all of you. Okay, so Deepthi, would you like to start first?
Yes. And the mic is on? Great. Hi, my name is Deepthi, and I had an initiative of the government of Telangana, which is in India, called WeHub, which is India's first state-led incubator for women entrepreneurs. How many of you were here for the session before, where you were introduced to the city of Bangalore? You were, right? So I wanted to just do one small pitch here. People have heard it before. So I come from a city called Hyderabad, which is just like Bangalore, but only much better. So, giving you a little bit of background, so I come from a state called Telangana, and it is a very new state. It was formed in 2014. So while you hear about startup cities, so we are actually a startup state. So we were just recently formed in 2014, and we created incubators. We created everything that you saw in the presentation. But one thing we always noticed is that we never saw any women actually walk in through the door. We knew they had enterprises. We knew they had businesses that they were doing, but we never actually saw any women entrepreneurs walk through our door, and we were always wondering why the case was. And that's why we thought, instead of just talking about a problem of why we don't have many women coming into a government office, we thought, why don't we create a new platform itself for women called WeHub? And that is the genesis for how we created WeHub. And as a person who has never worked with women before, and not being an entrepreneur myself, it was a very interesting challenge for me to answer to myself if WeHub was actually required. We talk about women entrepreneurs, but do you really need a special platform? And that was a question that I always had in mind, right? It's like we talk about quotas. Is it too patronizing to have a completely dedicated entity for women entrepreneurs? You know, there's already so many incubators, accelerators, programs for women. But what was really heartening is that the minute we opened our applications, we did 0 PR. I wanted to really test out if WeHub was really a necessary concept. And when we opened our applications, we did not do any major social media, PR, nothing. And we got about 295 applications for women entrepreneurs, and many of them from rural areas of Telangana as well. So that actually showed us that it was not a whim decision, but it was something that was necessary. So from the 295 applications, we actually selected about 26 startups which are working with us. And we are a sector-agnostic incubator. We work with women entrepreneurs across the spectrum. And I'm very glad to let you know that not one of them involves doing embroidery. I think that's what one of the things, when you think about women entrepreneurs in India, you invariably think of women sewing or stitching or things like that. And it was not a conscious choice that we did not choose somebody who's into those textiles and all that. It's just that there is a lot more sectors that women are into, but it's unfortunately that we focus on the very bottom, or not the bottom, but whatever is already there. So anyway, that's what we do. And right now we do 3 different things in our incubator. First is something known as access to government, because I think any entrepreneur, irrespective man or woman, they all need access to networks. And as a government entity, we make sure that we open up the government to women entrepreneurs so they can get all the assistance that they need. Second thing we are actually trying to do is build an entire ecosystem, so which is why I'm actually here, because the biggest benefit for any entrepreneur, again, I'm not being gender specific here, the biggest benefit for any entrepreneur is having the widest network possible. And I'm here to build an ecosystem for my entrepreneurs in WeHub and across the country. And the third thing we do is that we're also working very actively with every single incubator in India to make sure that any entrepreneur who comes to WeHub will have access to the entire ecosystem. So yeah, these are briefly, yeah.
And Chung?
Hi, so my name is Ying. I actually don't work with female entrepreneurs specifically. So when I was invited to the panel, I was also thinking about this question of, is there something very specific to the female experience of entrepreneurship? So immediately I thought about kind of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, and ones who are female. So a little bit of background about me, like I started my own startup, we went through accelerators, we raised investment, and then we sold the company. So I went through that experience, met a lot of different entrepreneurs, some of whom are female. And then after I sold the company, I started to consult for other social purpose founders and helping them scale their organizations. And so I've also worked with several different founders, some of whom are female. So I tried to think about, is there anything very specific to the female entrepreneurs and their challenges? And as a consultant now, I like to use frameworks, right? I try to diagnose problems by kind of categorizing the different founders. And I've categorized them by personality, stage of growth, culture, and even age. But it has never occurred to me to categorize them by gender. The challenges that they face, it never quite seemed to me like it was gender specific. It's more about some of these other factors, especially around personality. So then I try to think about, how about my personal experience? And I think while I did have kind of maybe one incident of kind of a Me Too moment, actually I think my general entrepreneurship experience has been characterized as actually quite advantageous. I found that being a woman actually gave me some perks. I mean, one example would be I wouldn't be speaking on this panel if I weren't a woman. So I think when I really think about it, I think fundamentally some of the challenges that I've seen both me and some of the founders facing are more around kind of communication and perception. And I think there can be some sort of gender biases around that. Both in the ways that we express ourselves and how we're perceived. But I also think that men also face the same challenges, and there might be more to do with personality, your upbringing, your cultural background, than only or necessarily your gender. So I guess that's kind of my experience of it, and I'd be happy to learn about other people's experiences and figure out maybe what we can potentially do about that.
I think Kaddie is going to have a very different perspective.
Yeah, quite. Does it work? Yeah. Hi, I'm Kaddie. I'm co-founder of the female-first creative agency Goalgirls, which we started about 1.5, 2 years ago. We made it here in Berlin, exactly, yeah. Me and my sister together, we're quite opposing types of women. She's a very practical, budget-orientated businesswoman, and I'm the mad creative she has to deal with and bring in some really big visions into the company. And we founded Goalgirls with the objective to be the female creative force of the industry, because I come from the ad industry and have experienced quite a lot of times that my voice simply wasn't being heard, and that the industry had been pretty much pale, male, stale, with creative directors in their middle-aged directing campaigns for a target audience they had actually absolutely no idea about, particularly for young women. So I decided I really want to make an impact on how women are represented in the industry. So we decided that our creative agency would be female first and female only, and as loud and bold as possible. And we did really well, and now we've turned our Goalgirls agency, which ended up being 8 girls, into a co-create agency of 80 girls, now turning to 110 girls. We're all freelancer women working really ambitiously on being loud in the industry, and collaboratively work on projects in a holacratic structure. We say we are autonomous, we work as one and a whole, all with the vision of being the co-create agency for female empowerment. And and we're running our first campaigns. We opened just a month ago in Mimhartstraße here in a big gallery space. So what we're finding out right now at the co-create agency is what are the ways women should and can make careers together. Because if you subtract the male impact of of the working culture, you get quite a different way of collaboration if you just have women in one room. And it's really interesting to see how working design processes and even campaigns are pitched when you just bring women to a room to decide what the narrative of the campaign is. And yeah, and we're working on finding that out.
Could you give us a couple of examples of how that narrative is different?
Yeah, especially when it comes to storytelling in general, women and our campaigns are very much movement focused because I think that's what women are really good at seeing the bigger picture of something rather than trying to sell a product. Usually our campaigns are very much about having a macro perspective on some type of changing the world, never the product in itself. And we completely remove gender stereotypes from the campaigns. We really try to bring people together in our campaigns and sharing their stories. And from the old ways of working in creative industries, there's quite a linear sort of approach of having to sign off with your art director, creative director, and all these different steps. But for us, it's the campaigns are very much conversational and built sort of brought together by sharing very emotional and personal stories.
Well, that's a good opening, because one of the first questions we wanted to address is, do women build different companies? Right. And Deepthi, I don't know whether there's enough runway now that you're seeing that. And you started by saying that you did not have experience working with women previously. So are you able to spot the difference in the people who are walking in, how they're approaching entrepreneurship?
So first thing is, yes, women do build companies a little bit differently. The reason is that they think a lot more about their customer when they're making a product than when some 10 teams with zero gender balance are actually working on things. Right. But one big difference that I actually notice is that when we talk about women entrepreneurs, especially in a culture like India, so it's always that the women are very risk averse, I think. I'm speaking from a very Indian context. Women are very risk averse. And the second thing is that for a woman to step up and say that, yes, I want to actually be an entrepreneur, that is an internal struggle itself. So it takes about, a lot of courage and determination for a woman to step up and say that, yes, I'm becoming an entrepreneur, and no, it's not a hobby. Right. So a lot of self-doubt actually, has to be answered to before the woman actually steps up and says she wants to be an entrepreneur. And the second thing is that there is no scope for a woman entrepreneur to actually fail, because she's already made a statement saying, I'm becoming an entrepreneur. And because of I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but women entrepreneurs are much more determined. They're much more focused on the success of the company. And a lot of thought, I think, Jayang, you can actually speak about it, a lot of thought actually goes into making their first product prototype. A lot of product market fit conversations happen. So I think women are, they do create products, but with a lot more sensitivity, if I may say.
And empathy. And I think, to speak to your point, one of the observations that I've seen is the lack of confidence usually translates itself to more attuned listening skills, because you go into the room thinking, what can I learn? I don't necessarily know everything. And that's the flip side. But as a general observation, I think one of the biggest drawbacks is the lack of confidence, right?
Shoba, to add to one more thing is that we had a lot of, when we started out with WeHub, we had a lot of women who were actually doing a lot of great work, socially impactful work, but they were running as an NGO. When we really went back to them and asked them, why is it that you're running an NGO when you have a product which is really marketable? They only said one thing: I don't think anybody will actually pay for my product. So I think that has been one big revelation for me, sitting on the other side of the table, that women who are actually doing great work always stay in this NGO and a non-paying model, because they do not know how to price their product, and they don't feel confident enough that something that they created actually has a financial value. So that is something we work on.
Yeah, I can completely add to that as well, because in the co-create agency we take campaigns on for NGOs and for the great cause. And the reason why we've changed sort of the model as well was because we build our campaigns like movements in general. So we do believe that any campaign we do should tell a really great story for the world. But it still shows that when we've got reverse pitches, that's when the NGOs come in and ask us for help, that the impact of into the group to how many people want to work on that project is so much larger than with any of the product-based things, because they really feel confident and really thrive when they get a mission that is not the pressure of payment on them in that moment. They work really hard on projects that are not paid because they're scared of not delivering up to the point where they are being paid for a campaign for a much bigger brand. And that's something that we're trying to change in the way actually the work is delivered as well, because when we adapt the campaigns more towards stuff they're really good at, which is empathy, storytelling, emotional storytelling, then they also feel more comfortable of taking on these, I don't know, a big gym wants this and that sort of campaign and stuff that doesn't mean as much. There's still a chance to bring in that emotional storytelling anyways.
So I might like split the question into two, which is, do female entrepreneurs like build different companies, and do they build companies differently? So on the topic of like building different companies, I thought about some of the founders that I've worked with. So I do find that a lot of them work in actually like communications and marketing, the female entrepreneurs, and some that are working in education, capacity building. So I guess things that may be like more traditionally kind of attributed to some female qualities around nurturing, being better communicators, and so forth. And given that this is a small sample size, we're talking about like dozens of entrepreneurs, not hundreds or thousands. But I think on the flip side, when I look at those categories, I can also identify an equal number of males, like male entrepreneurs who I'm working with that work in those areas. So to me, it's like not quite that well defined that it is something related to your gender that drives you to start something in a certain industry. And then on the second point, I think some of the qualities that we're highlighting here are like intellectual humility, like kind of uncertainty, maybe even like imposter syndrome. And then there's another thing about like approach, like being user-centered and human-centered in your design. I think like maybe it has something to do with maybe some cultural things as well. Some of the founders that I work with, I think both men and women have these qualities and lack these qualities. And not too clear to me that there's a pattern. So I think in terms of like building companies, do women build them differently? So yeah, maybe, I still think maybe culture has a lot to do with it. But so I'll give an example of one founder. So there's one thing that's definitely true, which is I have some female entrepreneurs who were pregnant throughout their entrepreneurship journey, were raising children throughout that journey. And I think that biological piece you pretty much cannot deny. There's a difference. But I've also seen them work very well with their children. I've also seen female entrepreneurs work poorly with their children. So there's one example, actually one who was working in influencer marketing, and she was just like went through a whole day of meetings in New York, and she was going up to her hotel, and she was bringing her children along, and then she went up and she got to her room, and as she was going in, one of her assistants said, "Where's your kid?" And she like left them at the lobby in the elevator. She totally forgot about the kid, right? And on the other hand, I have an entrepreneur who's a male, and he brings his kids to work, and he spends a lot of time like making time to be with his kids. And so, yes, I think there is something to the gender, but there's also maybe a lot more to do with kind of individuals and personalities and values as well.
But don't you think that it's also a little bit with a stigma? Because in the media, the way women and hardworking women are sort of like told stories about really puts a stigma on working mothers as much more than it does to men. Actually, with men, it's probably even, they get a big reward when their dad bringing their kids to work, and but it's not the same way with women. When women do try and handle the two things, then it's usually about more the storytelling about, maybe she's not such a good mother. And that's super weird, I think. And I think that's sort of what maybe even stop women from going the big step, just because they don't feel confident enough to overcome that stigma and not be judged by the people around them.
Well, one of my favorite empirical evidence of the different types of companies that women build is statistically, globally, if you look at startups, women-founded companies raise far less money. They have a very small percentage of the pie, but in terms of reaching profitability and survival, they have a disproportionately higher percentage. Right, so that is an interesting statistic. I do want to ask the audience. There are many women here, and I'm glad to see some men as well. And amongst the women, how many of you are currently in an entrepreneurial venture or thinking about becoming an entrepreneur? Please show of hands. Okay, so about maybe 20%. And are you in all female founder teams, or how many of you have male founders as well? 3 of you, okay, great. I have 2 male founders, so I see the evidence daily on an hourly and second-by-second basis. And I have become more observant of it. And I think, it's good to be observant because then you know what each party brings. Did you want to say something, Jay? You were. No.
I guess I just want to say something around, like, for founders in general. So I think if there's, like, structural or, like, regulatory or legal issues that, like, hold women back, I think that is really an issue.
Right.
The general issue about, like, kind of social pressures and norms, stigmas, I think men and women both face it depending on their upbringing. And so then maybe the solution is more about helping people kind of be more self-aware, be more confident, be more comfortable in taking their own path, regardless of what society is pushing them towards.
Right. And Deepthi and I were talking earlier, and I think for about 20 years now, there has been active advocacy for female entrepreneurship in many parts of the world. And the difference today is that it is being incentivized at multiple levels. So if we look at the next 10 years or 15 years, what do you think really are 2 things that need to happen or are evolving on their own?
The first thing I think is getting more women into the decision-making spaces. So when we talk about these various conversations that we keep having, less funding, that is one of the bigger issues. I don't know if you faced it, but yesterday we had a session by a very well-known accelerator program, and the MD of that company was actually saying that his cohort had about 80% women founders, and when he put these founders in front of the investors, the reaction was the same from both male and female investors. They were very, they were very indifferent to the women founders, and they walked in with an attitude of maybe, they really don't know what they're doing. And it was not just the male investors, it was the women as well. So one thing is that getting more women into decision-making spaces in the leadership roles, or in spaces where they can actually be a part of the conversation, I think that'll be very, very helpful. In Finland and other countries, there is a quota for women to be on the boards, but the unfortunate part is that they don't really have voting rights. So it's nice that there is a diversity on paper, but unless the women actually are part of the final decision, there is no point. So I think first is that. And the second thing is, as you pointed out, making individuals more aware that it is a gender equal system and everybody needs to work together. I think that'll be the biggest service. And as mothers and people in the community, I think we have a lot to do there as well. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just say a little bit about the data. Again, I think if there's structural issues, like they're on the board but they have no power or something like that, that's an issue. On the topic of funding amounts, I really would want to ask a question of why. So, is it again a structural issue of structured discrimination or unconscious bias in investors saying you're a woman, I've already discounted you by 20%? Or is there also a factor of women choosing not to raise money because they're more conservative? And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs who've gone out, raised a lot of money, build unprofitable companies and crash and burn, and take a lot of people down with them. I think building something with strong business fundamentals and maybe just growing organically, there's a lot of inherent value in that itself. I personally question my decisions to raise money, especially when I was going for a social purpose organization, because I think money often creates tensions between your ability to push a mission. So I think there are numbers, and it's important for us to understand the reasons behind those numbers.
Yes, I think so. 2 points that should change. Number one for me would definitely be a little bit of a change of culture between women with each other. The way we're raised right now just kind of feels a little bit competitive at times, and hyping up role models and the way female empowerment is communicated right now really feels again like it's just space for one woman in the gang, and again it feels a little bit limited to some founding females who are doing really well. I think what we need to realize is that we do really well as a group of people, collaborating with each other, and that's what women are really great at. And I also think that's the future of entrepreneurship for us. If we want to raise families, if we want to do everything we want to do, and we'll be stronger together in that sense. And that's something that we need to realize and not compete against each other or hype up certain role models and let them be the torches. And then number two, I think would be to create the spaces for them and also make sure that you are each other's torch. So make it your own mission to give cool jobs to the women around you and who are doing really well, not in the name of just female empowerment, just because they are doing well. I think we can just be the best cases for ourselves and show that we are going to found great companies and we make it work. And the only way to do that is also to increase the quota. Should not be a governmental issue. It should be about each other, about saying, cool, I would try and give this job to a woman just because that way we will raise the quota naturally as well, and we can show that we're doing well and there's no difference between the way men work and the way women work.
And on that inspirational note, we will open it up to questions from the floor for the next 20 minutes. Who would like to go with the first question? It's a special prize for you at the end. Well done.
So I would actually like to quote Kaddie on this. I think the reason is that right about now it is again, see, women investors also they might be actually they are also like, they don't want to be caught making the wrong judgment. And obviously a women entrepreneur would be the easy target, right? So that may be one of the reasons why. And coming down to the second point, when you have more women in decision-making spaces, as she pointed out, it's going to become a collaboration instead of a competition. And I think people will be much more reasonable and logical in doing things. And I think that is what is going to help out. They are mostly the only ones there, and it's like a zero-sum game. Either you prove yourself or not.
Yeah, and I think
and so that is a big issue. Yeah. Like an example, I'm the only woman in my entire team of 35 people. So whenever I make a decision, I have to make it as a leader as well as a woman. So it's to
give another example of that as well, is you get raised kind of in the same way. If you imagine you are a young girl and you're at the school play and it's Romeo and Juliet, there's only one position as a girl in that whole play, kind of. So you're kind of getting raised to being, okay, you're going to be the only girl that's hanging out with all the boys. It's going to be the coolest girl in the gang. There's always kind of this feeling of there is only one or two or three maybe in the coolest crowd, and one popular girl in high school movies. So we're being raised in sort of that competitive mode, and that sort of obviously extends into investment and boards.
Anyone else with a question? Alex? More balanced.
More balance. Was it directed at me? Am I getting it right? Or anybody? Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think branding somebody, raising a boy to be an alpha male is the answer. Raising the child to be, sensitive to each other's needs, I think is what is needed. And I have a boy and a girl. I think between both of them, I favor the girl a lot more. Not because because she throws more. No, but the thing is, there's no real difference. They both do things together. And it's not when I'm a mom, I don't think of like whether I'm raising her differently than him. It is more about are they able to understand the needs of people around them is what I actually think about. So yeah, alpha male and all these tags need to go. Like as she pointed out, if a dad brings a child to work, he's the superhero dad, such an amazing dad. But the most interesting thing. So my colleague actually took a day off and I'm like, where are you, man? He's like, I'm babysitting my son. I'm like, that's not called babysitting, it's called parenting and we do it every single day. So that is one thing that we really need to get that sensitivity into. It's not a competition. It is a complement that needs to happen. And I think as more of our generation becomes moms and do more work, I think this entire conversation need not happen maybe about 20 years later. And I think that will be a big win for all of us as a culture and a community.
Yes, go ahead.
Because I do have a very quiet voice. My name is Sarah. I'm co-founder of Co-Women. We offer co-working for women here at Alte Münze. And first of all, I want to thank you for your powerful words. Also you, Kaddie. I agree with a lot of what you say. And I would like to ask you if you also offer a space for women, if women themselves, when they come to your space, ever doubt that they have a lot of resources and gain a strong enough network by being amongst women only? Because that's a question we have to face all the time. Why only women?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when we started to turn our agency into a co-creagency, we thought what women would expect from our work would be great projects, cool stuff that we do. And when we did a poll just last week about what's the most amazing part about the space, the highest one was the networking. And I think actually, with the type of ambitious woman that comes to our space, they have been the cool girl in the gang with all the boys all their lives. So they have been in the men's world. But what they're lacking really is to be understood and to network with other women and feel a space where they're hyping each other up. And we sort of make it our mission to make sure we share as much as possible the work of each other on social media. Our name tag is a tag on Instagram, so we make sure people's illustrators' work gets seen. And so that's really what they're looking for. And I don't think in our case it's a limitation of the networking. It's sort of like try and find a new way of networking and also a space where you can feel safe to use your network, which sometimes women aren't so comfortable with, to take all of the resources, ask for help from others. They sometimes really try to push things for themselves and feel shy to ask for resources. And we sort of make it the mission to share resources and connect and collaborate and help each other.
Yeah, and on that note, one of the things that has changed in the last 20 years is really the type of organizations that are entering the debate. And 18 years ago, one of the entities that I found out about, which was based in New York, is called, it's called Springboard Enterprises. And they were one of the first female entrepreneurship advocacy groups. And their primary aim was to train women entrepreneurs to pitch their business in front of venture capital investors so that they could raise sizable funds to build tech-led companies. And over the years, you've seen, companies setting up initially CSR funding and then accelerators, et cetera, that were targeting female entrepreneurs. And you also had organizations like Dell. Dell has had for the last 8 or 9 years something called the Dell Women Entrepreneurs Network. And that really is a network capacity building enterprise. Funding is not the only thing. It's really about developing the network. And more recently, you have other companies such as SAP that are taking the debate, I think, a little bit further and saying it's not just women entrepreneurs, but it's also, there are lots of other underrepresented groups, and they have a new accelerator called No Boundaries. And I think that is a healthy direction, because it's not just about one disadvantaged group or one voice that isn't getting as heard as it could or should. Right, and I think the more we have of that, the better the network is going to be.
So I'll just add on to it. Yes, we have a physical space. We have about 50 seats in our incubator. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Indian government offices? They are the same everywhere in the world. So all government offices. So but at WeHub, one of the things that we've actually done is that we have 50 seats. We have a child play area. We have a mother's room, which is the first of its kind in any government office in my state at least. So first is that we wanted to make sure that we create an environment where women entrepreneurs feel that they can just walk in without any other hang-ups, like logistical issues and all that stuff. The second thing is when women entrepreneurs do come in, they get access to networks. But in addition to that, the first question we actually ask the entrepreneurs when they come in is, why are you doing it? And we actually sit down with them for quite some time. And we actually have a professor of gender studies in a very well-known school in Hyderabad sit down with us for all these sessions. It's not a counseling session, it is just a conversation. Because we want to understand what the hurdles for that entrepreneur are, and we want to understand how we should actually be able to tailor-make a program to help her out. So we do very individual and targeted interactions, and the space is just a physical manifestation of all the support that we want to offer to the women entrepreneur. Yeah. Does it answer?
Yes, it does. Actually, for me, or for us, the biggest challenge is really to explain it to people who haven't felt it or who didn't experience it yet. Because when they come together, when they experience a space and when they do exchange with other women, then they feel the energy and they get empowered through that. So it is really a struggle to explain it to someone who hasn't experienced it. And my co-founder is also here with me somewhere, Hannah, so if you have any questions, come up to us, and we love to talk about it, about it also.
Yeah. Actually, both Kaddie and Deepthi, how do you ensure that there are other voices or perspectives that are coming into the conversation at both your spaces?
I have the mic, so I'll go first. So the first thing we actually do is we host a meetup every 2 weeks. And it is not just WeHub. We invite incubators from across Hyderabad. We have 37 of them. So we bring in a lot of different perspectives, because while we feel what we are doing is absolutely right, we need to actually be open to the idea that maybe we are not. So we do these meetups, and we make sure that our startups mingle with the other startups in the ecosystem. We have a conversation with the incubators head from various other sector-specific incubators also. Being very open and taking a lot of feedback and implementing it into our system, I think, is something that we are working towards and getting better at. Yeah.
We've started an initiative called 50 for 50, which is 25 male CMOs, marketing directors from the industry coming in for a co-creation process with 25 of our creatives. And we go through campaigns we're just working on, exchanging ideas, both sides, with their projects and our projects, and really try to work through what their process is and what might go wrong at certain stages. I mean, we've just been around for a month, as I said, but this is the initiative where we've decided is going to bring us forward also into our processes. And generally, I think we really look out for our Instagram community to help us out in all of our campaigns. And it's actually 50-50 in our Instagram community, which is really beautiful. So we try to get the conversations about whatever we're doing up on our social media feeds as well. And that's where we get the critic and the why are you doing this monoculture bits, everything that you need to hear when you start a company like this. And we try to be as open as possible to bring in and answer any questions and feedbacks and bring in the perspective as well.
I see Dirk here. Are we out of time? One question? Okay. So one last question from the audience. Yes? Go ahead. Yeah.
normal, like it's the work. Our work has nothing to do with our gender. Like once I got a comment from a female, like you are one of the few women who are doing such a great work in agriculture. Then I replied her that my work has nothing to do with my gender. So I really don't understand the concept behind people labeling it woman entrepreneur and doing many things. So I would like to understand what is the cause which is driven like to label it like a woman entrepreneur or something like that.
It's just like I'm being encouraged to answer more questions, but in this question, I mean, I completely agree with you. I've never labeled myself as a female entrepreneur, so the only thing that I could maybe add to that is the useful thing is it opens you to a lot of opportunities to speak on panels like this for certain investors who are aware and would like to increase their gender diversity in their portfolio. Like you get put into a spotlight, and I think perhaps there's a moral question of whether you want to take advantage of this piece of your identity. There are many different pieces, like you might be a minority, you might have disabilities, and you might be put in the front of the line because of other mechanisms who are trying to compensate for some of the structural discrimination that has already happened in the world. Whether or not you want to be part of this or take advantage of this is your choice. For me, I guess I'm very consequentialist in terms of ethics, and so I have a goal of creating a certain impact in the world. If this can help me achieve that without creating harm to others, to me, I think it's fine, and I would take advantage of it.
And I think hopefully we all want to be at conferences where there isn't a female entrepreneurs track, because there doesn't need to be one. So on that note, thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over to Dell for the next.
Hey, applause.